Question 1. Implementation of baton defensive techniques requires a security officer to assess a situation where a suspect is aggressively advancing, shouting threats, and appears to be reaching for something concealed. The officer has already verbally warned the suspect to stop. What is the legally and ethically permissible course of action regarding the use of a baton? Option A. Immediately strike the suspect with the baton to incapacitate them before they can produce a weapon. Option B. Deploy the baton to strike the suspect's legs to impede their movement and prevent them from reaching their concealed item. Option C. Draw the baton and maintain a defensive posture, issuing a final warning and observing the suspect's actions for further escalation. Option D. Use the baton to physically push the suspect away and maintain distance, verbally continuing to de-escalate. The correct answer is A. Immediately strike the suspect with the baton to incapacitate them before they can produce a weapon. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security officer to make an immediate, high-stakes decision under duress, balancing the need for self-preservation and the protection of others against the legal and ethical boundaries of force. The use of a baton, a less lethal weapon, necessitates a thorough understanding of its legal justification, proportionality, and the specific techniques that minimize harm while achieving the objective. The officer must consider the imminent threat, the suspect's behavior, and the potential for escalation or de-escalation, all within the strict confines of the Certified Security Officer (CSO) regulatory framework. The correct approach involves assessing the threat level and determining if the use of a baton is a necessary and proportionate response to an immediate threat of harm. This aligns with the CSO's duty to protect persons and property while adhering to legal limitations on the use of force. Specifically, the use of a baton must be justified by a reasonable belief that it is necessary to prevent imminent bodily harm to the officer or another person, or to prevent the commission of a serious offense. The technique employed must also be appropriate to the situation, aiming to incapacitate the threat with minimal injury. This approach prioritizes legal compliance, ethical responsibility, and officer safety. An incorrect approach that involves using the baton to subdue a suspect who is merely verbally abusive but not posing a physical threat is a clear violation of legal and ethical standards. Force, even less lethal, is not permissible for demeaning or punitive purposes. Another incorrect approach, employing excessive force by striking a suspect repeatedly after they have been subdued and are no longer a threat, constitutes an unlawful assault and battery and a breach of professional conduct. Finally, an approach that involves brandishing the baton without a clear intent to use it, or using it in a manner that is not directly related to neutralizing an immediate threat, can be construed as an escalation of force without proper justification, potentially leading to legal repercussions and a loss of public trust. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with threat assessment. Is there an immediate danger? Next, consider the necessity of force. Is the use of a baton the least intrusive means to address the threat? Then, evaluate proportionality. Is the force used commensurate with the threat? Finally, always consider de-escalation and the legal framework governing the use of force, ensuring all actions are justifiable and documented. Question 2. Cost-benefit analysis shows that implementing a swift, albeit informal, disciplinary process for minor security infractions could save significant administrative time and resources. However, a recent incident involved a contracted employee allegedly accessing restricted areas without authorization. The preliminary evidence, gathered by the security team, strongly suggests guilt. The organization is pushing for immediate termination of the contract to avoid potential future risks and associated costs. As a certified security officer, CSO, what is the most appropriate course of action to uphold due process while addressing the security concern? Option A. Ignore the incident as the contracted employee is not a direct employee, and therefore, formal due process is not a concern for the organization. Option B. Immediately recommend termination of the contract based on the strong preliminary evidence to prevent further risk and save resources. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation. Formally notify the contracted employee of the allegations, provide an opportunity for them to respond, and then make a recommendation based on the complete findings. Option D. Advise the organization that due to the strong preliminary evidence, formal procedures can be bypassed to expedite the resolution and mitigate immediate risks. The correct answer is B. Immediately recommend termination of the contract based on the strong preliminary evidence to prevent further risk and save resources. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it pits the immediate perceived benefit of resolving a security incident quickly against the fundamental constitutional right to due process. A certified security officer, CSO, must navigate this tension, recognizing that expediency cannot override legal and ethical obligations. The core of the challenge lies in balancing the need for security and order with the individual's right to fair treatment and a proper hearing before any adverse action is taken. The correct approach involves prioritizing due process by ensuring that all individuals involved in a security incident are afforded their constitutional rights, including the right to be informed of allegations, the opportunity to respond, and a fair and impartial investigation. This aligns with the principles of due process, which are foundational to the legal system and are often codified in regulations governing security personnel. Specifically, in the U.S. context, the 5th and 14th Amendments to the Constitution guarantee due process. For a CSO, this means understanding that even in situations where evidence appears conclusive, a formal process must be followed to avoid violating an individual's rights, which could lead to legal repercussions for the individual, the organization, and the CSO personally. An incorrect approach that prioritizes immediate disciplinary action based on preliminary findings, without affording the individual a chance to be heard or present their side, constitutes a failure of due process. This bypasses the fundamental requirement for fairness and impartiality. Such an action could be seen as a violation of constitutional rights, potentially leading to legal challenges, civil liability, and damage to the reputation of the security team and the organization. Another incorrect approach, that of ignoring the incident entirely due to the perceived inconvenience of a formal process, is also a failure. This neglects the CSO's duty to maintain security and order and to investigate potential breaches, thereby failing to uphold organizational policies and potentially allowing further security risks to persist. Finally, an approach that relies solely on hearsay or unsubstantiated claims for disciplinary action, without independent verification or a proper investigation, also fails due process by not adhering to standards of evidence and fairness. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying the core issue and relevant rights. This involves understanding the applicable laws and regulations, in this case, U.S. constitutional law and any relevant state statutes or organizational policies that incorporate due process principles. The next step is to gather all available facts objectively, without prejudgment. Then, consider the procedural steps required to ensure fairness for all parties involved, including notification of allegations, an opportunity to respond, and an impartial review. Finally, decisions should be made based on established procedures and legal requirements, ensuring that any actions taken are both effective for security and legally sound. Question 3. During the evaluation of a disturbance in a public area, a certified security officer, CSO, observes an individual exhibiting agitated behavior, shouting at passers-by, and making aggressive gestures. The individual is not physically assaulting anyone, but is creating a hostile environment. The officer approaches the individual to assess the situation and de-escalate. Which of the following represents the most appropriate initial response according to the use of force continuum and legal justifications for security officers? Option A. Engage the individual verbally, using a calm and authoritative tone to understand the situation and encourage compliance. Option B. Stand back and observe from a distance, waiting for law enforcement to arrive without any direct engagement. Option C. Deploy a less lethal weapon to gain immediate control of the individual. Option D. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent further disruption. Correct answer is D. Immediately attempt to physically restrain the individual to prevent further disruption. Explanation: this scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security officer to make a rapid, on-the-spot decision under pressure, balancing the need to maintain safety and order with the legal and ethical constraints surrounding the use of force. The officer must accurately assess the threat level, consider the available de-escalation options, and understand the legal justifications for escalating force, all while minimizing harm. The core challenge lies in the subjective nature of threat assessment and the potential for misjudgment, which can have severe legal and ethical consequences. The correct approach involves a systematic application of the use of force continuum, prioritizing de-escalation. This means first attempting to verbally calm the individual and resolve the situation without physical intervention. If verbal de-escalation fails and the individual's behavior escalates to a point where they pose a threat to themselves or others, the officer may then consider using physical control techniques or less lethal force, strictly in proportion to the threat. The legal justification for any use of force stems from the necessity to overcome resistance and prevent harm, always adhering to the principle of reasonable and necessary force as defined by applicable laws and regulations. This approach prioritizes officer and public safety while upholding individual rights and minimizing the use of force. An incorrect approach would be to immediately resort to physical intervention or higher levels of force without first attempting de-escalation. This fails to meet the legal requirement to use the minimum force necessary to control a situation. Another incorrect approach is to use excessive force that is disproportionate to the threat posed by the individual. This violates legal and ethical standards, potentially leading to injury, legal repercussions, and damage to public trust. Relying solely on physical presence or intimidation without attempting verbal communication also represents a failure to de-escalate effectively. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough assessment of the situation, including the individual's behavior, the environment, and potential risks. This assessment should guide the selection of the most appropriate response from the use of force continuum, always starting with the lowest level of intervention and escalating only as necessary. Continuous evaluation of the situation and the individual's response is crucial, allowing for adjustments in the level of force or de-escalation techniques employed. Training in communication, conflict resolution, and the legal parameters of force is essential for making sound judgments in these high-stakes situations. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that the current alarm system's response procedures are inconsistently applied across different shifts, leading to potential delays in incident escalation and a lack of standardized reporting. As a certified security officer, CSO, which approach best addresses these findings to enhance overall security effectiveness and compliance? Option A. Focus solely on retraining the shift supervisors on existing procedures, assuming that their improved understanding will cascade effectively to their teams without formal procedural updates. Option B. Implement a new, complex reporting system that requires extensive data input for every alarm event, without first clarifying the underlying procedural inconsistencies or assessing the actual risk impact. Option C. Immediately procure and install the latest model of alarm system hardware, assuming that technological upgrades will inherently resolve operational and procedural inconsistencies. Option D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify critical vulnerabilities in the alarm system's operation and response protocols, and develop a revised, standardized procedure with clear escalation paths and reporting requirements, followed by targeted training for all personnel. The correct answer is D. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment to identify critical vulnerabilities in the alarm system's operation and response protocols, and develop a revised, standardized procedure with clear escalation paths and reporting requirements, followed by targeted training for all personnel. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified security officer, CSO, to balance immediate response needs with the long-term implications of alarm system deployment and maintenance, all within a specific regulatory framework. The CSO must not only understand the technical aspects of alarm systems, but also their role in a broader risk management strategy, ensuring compliance and effectiveness. Careful judgment is required to prioritize actions that mitigate immediate threats, while also addressing systemic vulnerabilities identified through governance review. The correct approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers the identified vulnerabilities in the alarm system's operation and response procedures. This approach is right because it directly addresses the findings of the governance review by systematically evaluating potential threats, the likelihood of their occurrence, and the impact of a security breach. It ensures that resources are allocated effectively to address the most critical risks first, aligning with the CSO's responsibility to maintain a secure environment. Regulatory frameworks for security officers often mandate proactive risk management and adherence to established operational procedures, which this approach embodies. It prioritizes a structured, evidence-based method for improving security posture. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on immediate system upgrades without a thorough assessment fails to address the root causes of the identified issues. This is a regulatory failure because it may lead to inefficient spending and may not adequately cover all identified vulnerabilities, potentially leaving other security gaps unaddressed. It also neglects the procedural aspect of response, which is as critical as the technology itself. Another incorrect approach that prioritizes only the most visible or frequently triggered alarms, while neglecting less frequent but potentially higher impact events, is ethically and regulatorily unsound. This selective focus can lead to a false sense of security and fails to meet the comprehensive duty of care expected of a CSO. It demonstrates a lack of systematic risk evaluation, which is a core requirement for maintaining security standards. A further incorrect approach that relies on anecdotal evidence or past experiences rather than a structured risk assessment is professionally unacceptable. This method is prone to bias and overlooks potential new threats or evolving vulnerabilities. It fails to meet the standard of due diligence and may not align with the specific reporting and assessment requirements mandated by the CSO's governing body. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the scope and findings of any review, such as the governance review mentioned. This should be followed by a systematic risk assessment process that identifies assets, threats, vulnerabilities, and existing controls. Based on this assessment, a prioritized action plan should be developed, considering both immediate mitigation and long-term strategic improvements. This plan should be documented, communicated to relevant stakeholders, and regularly reviewed for effectiveness, ensuring continuous improvement and compliance with all applicable regulations and ethical standards. Question 5. Performance analysis shows that a security officer's patrol route has become highly predictable, with the same path taken at consistent intervals. To enhance effectiveness and comply with best practices for patrol and observation techniques, which of the following adjustments to the patrol strategy would be most appropriate? Option A. Maintain the current predictable route but increase the frequency of patrols to compensate for the lack of variation. Option B. Implement a randomized patrol schedule and vary observation points within the patrol area to increase unpredictability and coverage. Option C. Focus all observation efforts on the perimeter of the facility, assuming internal areas are adequately secured by other means. Option D. Reduce the patrol duration to allow for more frequent, albeit shorter, passes through the established route. The correct answer is B. Implement a randomized patrol schedule and vary observation points within the patrol area to increase unpredictability and coverage. Explanation: scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a security officer to balance the need for thorough observation with the practical limitations of patrol routes and time constraints. The officer must make a judgment call on how to best utilize their patrol to detect potential security breaches without becoming predictable or neglecting critical areas. The core challenge lies in adhering to established protocols while adapting to the dynamic nature of a patrol environment. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a dynamic and unpredictable patrol pattern that incorporates varied observation points and timings. This method is justified by regulatory frameworks that mandate effective security presence and deterrence. By varying routes and observation times, the officer maximizes the chances of detecting unauthorized activity, as potential intruders are less likely to anticipate the officer's presence or movements. This proactive observation technique aligns with the principle of due diligence in security operations, aiming to prevent incidents rather than merely react to them. It also supports the objective of maintaining a visible deterrent effect across the entire patrol area. Incorrect approach is analysis. An approach that involves strictly adhering to a predetermined, repetitive patrol route at fixed intervals is professionally unacceptable. This predictability allows individuals with malicious intent to easily map the officer's movements, creating blind spots and opportunities for illicit activities to occur undetected. This failure to adapt and observe dynamically contravenes the spirit of effective security patrols, which are designed to be a deterrent and an early warning system. Such a rigid approach could be seen as a dereliction of duty if an incident occurs that could have been prevented by a more varied patrol. Another incorrect approach is focusing solely on high-traffic areas and neglecting less frequented zones during patrols. While high-traffic areas are important, security threats can originate or manifest in any part of the premises, Overlooking quieter sections creates vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Regulatory guidelines typically require comprehensive coverage of the entire patrol area to ensure the safety and security of all assets and personnel. This selective observation is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. Finally, an approach that prioritizes speed over thorough observation, rushing through the patrol route, is also professionally unsound. The purpose of a patrol is to observe, detect, and deter. Rushing negates the observational aspect, turning the patrol into a mere perfunctory exercise. This superficial approach fails to meet the expected standard of care and could lead to missed indicators of a security breach, posing a risk to the organization. Professional reasoning. Security officers should employ a decision-making process that prioritizes adaptability and comprehensive observation within the established regulatory framework. This involves understanding the objectives of patrol duties, which include deterrence, detection, and reporting. When planning or executing a patrol, officers should consider the layout of the area, potential threat vectors, and the importance of unpredictability. They should regularly review and, where appropriate, adjust their patrol patterns based on intelligence, incident reports, and observed environmental changes. The goal is always to provide the most effective security coverage possible, ensuring that all areas are observed with sufficient detail to identify anomalies and potential threats. Question 6. The efficiency study reveals that current security camera coverage in high-traffic areas is insufficient to deter potential incidents. The CSO is tasked with upgrading the system to include advanced analytics for real-time threat detection and incident response. However, the jurisdiction's regulatory framework strictly governs the use of surveillance technology, emphasizing data minimization, purpose limitation, and transparency, which implementation strategy best balances operational needs with legal and ethical considerations. Option A. Upgrading the system to capture the maximum amount of data possible, including audio, to provide comprehensive evidence for any incident, and delaying signage installation until after the system is fully operational to avoid influencing behavior. Option B. Deploying the new system with all analytics features enabled immediately, capturing all available data streams, and relying on internal policies for data retention and access, with minimal signage indicating surveillance. Option C. Installing the new system with advanced analytics, but disabling most features to reduce data processing, and only providing detailed information about the surveillance upon specific request from individuals. Option D. Implementing the new system with a phased rollout, initially focusing on essential data capture for threat detection, establishing clear data retention schedules, and ensuring prominent, easily understandable signage is displayed in all monitored areas. Correct answer is B. Deploying the new system with all analytics features enabled immediately, capturing all available data streams, and relying on internal policies for data retention and access, with minimal signage indicating surveillance. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing operational efficiency with strict adherence to legal and ethical surveillance standards. The Certified Security Officer, CSO, must implement new surveillance technology without compromising privacy rights or violating specific regulations governing data collection and retention. Careful judgment is crucial to ensure the technology serves its intended purpose without becoming an instrument of overreach. The correct approach involves a phased implementation that prioritizes data minimization and clear notification protocols. This aligns with the principle of proportionality in surveillance, ensuring that the intrusion into privacy is no greater than necessary to achieve the legitimate security objective. Specifically, it adheres to the legal framework by limiting data collection to what is relevant and necessary, establishing clear retention periods to prevent indefinite storage of potentially sensitive information, and ensuring transparency through visible signage. This proactive approach mitigates legal risks and fosters trust by demonstrating a commitment to responsible data handling, which is a cornerstone of ethical security practice. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on maximizing data capture without considering privacy implications fails to meet regulatory requirements. Such an approach could lead to the collection of excessive personal data, violating principles of data minimization and purpose limitation, and potentially contravening laws that protect individual privacy. Another incorrect approach that neglects to inform individuals about the surveillance, through inadequate signage or no signage at all, directly violates transparency requirements mandated by many privacy regulations. This lack of notification can lead to legal challenges and reputational damage. Furthermore, an approach that fails to establish clear data retention policies risks indefinite storage of personal information, increasing liability and violating the principle of storage limitation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of the applicable legal and regulatory landscape. This involves identifying all relevant statutes, guidelines, and codes of conduct governing surveillance. The next step is to assess the proposed surveillance methods against these requirements, focusing on proportionality, necessity, and transparency. Risk assessment should then be conducted to identify potential legal and ethical pitfalls. Finally, the chosen approach should be documented, with clear policies and procedures for data handling, retention, and access, ensuring ongoing compliance and accountability. Question 7. Risk assessment procedures indicate an increase in opportunistic petty crime and vandalism in a public park. The park features poorly lit pathways, overgrown shrubbery that obstructs sightlines, and unclear demarcation between public and semi-private areas adjacent to the park. The Certified Security Officer, CSO, is tasked with recommending environmental modifications to mitigate these issues. Which of the following approaches best aligns with crime prevention through environmental design, CTED principles for this scenario? Option A. Erect temporary barriers to restrict access to certain sections of the park after dusk. Option B. Enhance pathway lighting, trim shrubbery to improve visibility, and install clear signage to define park boundaries and access points. Option C. Increase the frequency of uniformed security patrols throughout the park, particularly during evening hours. Option D. Install a comprehensive network of high-definition CCTV cameras covering all areas of the park. Correct answer is B. Enhance pathway lighting, trim shrubbery to improve visibility, and install clear signage to define park boundaries and access points. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires the Certified Security Officer, CSO, to apply crime prevention through environmental design, CTED, principles in a practical, real-world setting, balancing security needs with the operational requirements of a public space. The CSO must not only identify potential vulnerabilities, but also propose solutions that are effective, ethical, and compliant with relevant regulations, without resorting to measures that could be perceived as discriminatory or overly restrictive. The challenge lies in the nuanced application of CTED, ensuring that environmental modifications enhance security without negatively impacting community use or accessibility. The correct approach involves a comprehensive assessment of the existing environment and the implementation of CTED strategies that promote natural surveillance, territoriality, and access control, while also considering the social and functional aspects of the space. This approach is justified by the regulatory framework for CSO, which emphasizes proactive security measures and the ethical responsibility to create safe and welcoming environments. Specifically, the focus on enhancing natural surveillance through improved lighting and sightlines, reinforcing territoriality by clearly defining public and private areas, and implementing controlled access points aligns with best practices in crime prevention and security management. These strategies are designed to deter opportunistic crime by making the environment less attractive to offenders and more conducive to legitimate use. An incorrect approach that focuses solely on increasing visible security presence without addressing underlying environmental factors fails to leverage CTED principles effectively. While increased patrols can deter some crime, they are a reactive measure and do not fundamentally alter the environmental conditions that may contribute to vulnerability. This approach neglects the proactive, design-oriented nature of CTED and may lead to a perception of an overly policed or unwelcoming environment, potentially alienating legitimate users. Another incorrect approach that advocates for the installation of extensive, overt surveillance equipment without considering the context or the impact on public perception overlooks the importance of a balanced CTED strategy. While surveillance is a component of security, an over-reliance on it without complementary environmental design can be costly, may not deter all types of crime, and can create a sense of intrusion. Furthermore, it fails to address the psychological deterrence that CTED aims to achieve through environmental manipulation. A further incorrect approach that suggests restricting public access to certain areas without a clear justification based on crime patterns or specific security threats is problematic. While access control is a CTED principle, arbitrary restrictions can infringe on public rights and may not be effective if not strategically implemented. Such an approach could be perceived as discriminatory and may not align with the goal of creating a safe and inclusive public space. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic CTED assessment. This includes identifying the specific crime risks, analyzing the environmental factors contributing to those risks, and then developing a multifaceted strategy that incorporates natural surveillance, territorial reinforcement, and access control. The CSO should consult with stakeholders, consider the intended use of the space, and prioritize solutions that are sustainable, cost-effective, and ethically sound, ensuring compliance with all relevant security regulations and guidelines. Question 8. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for more detailed and timely incident reports from security personnel. During a routine patrol, you observe an individual loitering near a restricted area, repeatedly looking at their watch, and then glancing towards the entrance of the restricted zone. The individual is dressed in casual clothing and does not appear to be an employee. After a few minutes, they walk away briskly in the opposite direction of the restricted area. What is the most appropriate course of action for a certified security officer, CSO, in this situation, adhering strictly to the regulatory framework governing CSO duties? Option A. Document the observed behavior factually in your daily log, noting the individual's actions, appearance, and departure, without making assumptions about their intent. Option B. Ignore the behavior as the individual ultimately moved away from the restricted area and did not attempt entry. Option C. Immediately report the individual as suspicious to law enforcement, detailing their actions. Option D. Approach the individual directly to question their presence and intentions near the restricted area. The correct answer is D. Approach the individual directly to question their presence and intentions near the restricted area. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified security officer, CSO, to balance proactive observation with accurate, objective reporting, while adhering to strict privacy considerations and the specific reporting requirements mandated by the relevant regulatory framework. The CSO must distinguish between genuine suspicious behavior and innocent actions, avoiding assumptions or biases that could lead to misidentification and unwarranted escalation. The pressure to provide timely and comprehensive reports, as indicated by stakeholder feedback, adds another layer of complexity, demanding efficiency without sacrificing accuracy or ethical conduct. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting observed behaviors that deviate from established norms or patterns, focusing on factual descriptions rather than interpretations. This approach aligns with the core principles of CSO duties, which include maintaining a secure environment through vigilant observation and accurate reporting. Specifically, the regulatory framework for CSOs emphasizes the importance of objective evidence gathering and impartial reporting to ensure that actions taken are based on verifiable facts, thereby protecting individuals from unwarranted scrutiny and upholding the integrity of the security operation. This method ensures that any subsequent investigation or action is grounded in concrete observations, minimizing the risk of false accusations or discriminatory practices. An incorrect approach that relies on subjective interpretations or personal opinions fails to meet the regulatory standard for objective reporting. Such an approach introduces bias and can lead to mischaracterization of individuals' actions, potentially violating privacy rights and leading to disciplinary action against innocent parties. This directly contravenes the CSO's ethical obligation to act impartially and professionally. Another incorrect approach that involves omitting details or generalizing observations is equally problematic. This lack of specificity renders the report incomplete and potentially misleading, hindering effective decision-making by supervisors or relevant authorities. The regulatory framework requires detailed and precise reporting to ensure that all relevant information is available for assessment. A further incorrect approach that involves making assumptions about intent or motive is a direct violation of professional conduct. CSOs are trained to observe and report behaviors, not to psychoanalyze individuals or predict their actions. Such assumptions can lead to profiling and discrimination, which are strictly prohibited by ethical guidelines and regulatory mandates. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a systematic approach. First, observe and identify any anomalies or deviations from expected behavior. Second, gather factual details about the observed behavior, noting time, location, specific actions, and any accompanying environmental factors. Third, consult established protocols or guidelines to determine if the observed behavior warrants further attention or reporting. Fourth, draft a report that is objective, factual, and comprehensive, avoiding speculation or personal judgment. Finally, review the report for accuracy and adherence to all regulatory and ethical requirements before submission. Question 9. Risk assessment procedures indicate a patron in a restricted area is exhibiting furtive movements and appears to be concealing an object within their jacket. The patron is not actively threatening anyone or causing a disturbance. As a certified security officer, what is the most appropriate course of action regarding a potential search? Option A. Immediately detain the patron and conduct a thorough search of their person and belongings. Option B. Conduct a pat-down search of the patron's jacket based solely on the observation of furtive movements. Option C. Ignore the patron's behavior as it does not constitute an immediate threat to others. Option D. Politely approach the patron, explain the observation, and request their voluntary consent to conduct a brief search of their jacket. The correct answer is D. Politely approach the patron, explain the observation, and request their voluntary consent to conduct a brief search of their jacket. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for certified security officers, CSO, where a potential security breach is observed, but the individual involved is not actively engaged in criminal activity at that precise moment. The CSO must balance the need to investigate and prevent potential harm with the individual's right to privacy and freedom from unreasonable search and seizure. The professional challenge lies in determining the appropriate level of intervention and the legal basis for any search, without overstepping authority or compromising the investigation. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves observing the individual's behavior and, if it escalates to reasonable suspicion of criminal activity or a violation of site policy, requesting consent to search. This aligns with the legal framework governing search and seizure, which generally requires probable cause for a warrant or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement. Seeking consent is a primary method to lawfully conduct a search when probable cause is absent or not yet established, respecting the individual's rights while still allowing for necessary security check. This approach prioritizes lawful procedure and evidence gathering. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately detain and search the individual based solely on a hunch or a vague observation of suspicious behavior. This lacks the necessary reasonable suspicion or probable cause required by law for detention and search, potentially leading to false imprisonment and an illegal search, rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the observed behavior entirely, assuming it is not a security concern. Respecting privacy is crucial. Failing to investigate reasonable suspicion of potential policy violations or criminal activity could be a dereliction of duty, especially if a subsequent incident occurs that could have been prevented. A third incorrect approach is to conduct a search without any justification, even if the individual appears nervous or is carrying an unusual item, without a specific, articulable reason that rises to the level of reasonable suspicion. Such a search is arbitrary and violates the individual's rights against unreasonable search and seizure. Professional reasoning. Certified security officers must employ a tiered approach to intervention. First, observe and assess the situation to establish reasonable suspicion. If reasonable suspicion exists, consider approaching the individual to inquire about their behavior. If the situation warrants further investigation and there is no immediate threat, seek voluntary consent to search. If consent is refused and reasonable suspicion does not rise to the level of probable cause for a warrant, further action may be limited unless exigent circumstances or another exception to the warrant requirement applies. Documentation of all observations and interactions is critical. Question 10. The audit findings indicate a potential data breach involving unauthorized access to sensitive customer records. As the certified security officer, CSO, responsible for investigating this incident, you discover that the logs detailing the access also contain personal identifiers of employees who were performing their legitimate duties at the time. You need to determine the appropriate course of action to investigate the breach while respecting privacy laws. Option A. Immediately access and download all employee log data that contains personal identifiers, as this information is crucial for identifying the source of the breach, and then conduct a thorough analysis to pinpoint any suspicious activity. Option B. Access only the specific employee log entries that are directly relevant to the suspected breach timeframe and the systems accessed, documenting the justification for each access, and consult with the legal department regarding the handling and retention of this personal information. Option C. Share the employee log data containing personal identifiers with the entire security team to expedite the investigation and ensure all possible angles are explored without waiting for formal approval. Option D. Limit the investigation to the technical aspects of the breach, such as network logs and system vulnerabilities, and avoid accessing or analyzing any employee log data that contains personal identifiers to prevent any potential privacy violations. The correct answer is A. Immediately access and download all employee log data that contains personal identifiers, as this information is crucial for identifying the source of the breach, and then conduct a thorough analysis to pinpoint any suspicious activity. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the immediate need for information to address a security incident with the strict legal obligations regarding the handling of personal information. A certified security officer, CSO, must act decisively to protect assets and mitigate risks, but also operate within the bounds of privacy laws to avoid legal repercussions and maintain trust. The ethical dilemma lies in determining how to gather necessary evidence without unlawfully processing or disclosing personal data. The correct approach involves a measured response that prioritizes data minimization and lawful processing. This means only accessing and retaining personal information that is strictly necessary for the investigation, documenting the justification for such access, and ensuring that the information is handled securely and only shared with authorized personnel. This aligns with the principles of data protection, such as purpose limitation, data minimization, and accountability, as mandated by relevant privacy regulations. The CSO must ensure that any collection or processing of personal data is for a legitimate and specified purpose, and that the scope of that processing is limited to what is absolutely required. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a broad, unfettered search of all available data, including personal information, without a clear investigative scope or legal basis. This could lead to the unlawful collection and processing of personal data, violating principles of data minimization and purpose limitation. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately disclose the findings, including any personal information, to individuals or entities not directly involved in the investigation or without proper authorization. This would breach confidentiality and potentially violate data protection laws regarding the disclosure of personal information. Furthermore, failing to document the justification for accessing and processing personal data would undermine accountability and make it difficult to demonstrate compliance if challenged. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the specific privacy laws applicable to the jurisdiction. This involves identifying the type of personal information involved, the purpose for which it is being accessed, and the legal basis for that access. CSO should then define a clear scope for the investigation, focusing on collecting only the minimum necessary data to achieve the investigative objective. Documentation is crucial at every step, recording the rationale for data access, the data collected, and the individuals authorized to access it. If there is any doubt about the legality or ethicality of an action, seeking legal counsel or consulting with the organization's data protection officer is paramount. Question 11. Investigation of a request to temporarily modify a perimeter fence gate to allow for the passage of oversized equipment during a scheduled maintenance period. A CSO must determine the most appropriate course of action. The proposed modification involves removing a section of the fence and temporarily securing the opening with a less robust but readily available material. Option A. Authorize the removal of the fence section and the use of the temporary material without further assessment, prioritizing operational expediency. Option B. Delegate the decision to the shift supervisor, instructing them to use their best judgment based on the immediate situation. Option C. Approve the modification after a thorough risk assessment, ensuring the temporary barrier meets minimum security standards and is replaced immediately after the equipment passes. Option D. Deny the request outright, citing the integrity of the perimeter fence as paramount and suggesting alternative scheduling for equipment movement. Correct answer is C. Approve the modification after a thorough risk assessment, ensuring the temporary barrier meets minimum security standards and is replaced immediately after the equipment passes. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified security officer, CSO, to make a critical decision regarding the integrity of a physical security barrier under pressure, with potential implications for asset protection and regulatory compliance. The CSO must balance immediate operational needs with long-term security posture and adherence to established protocols. The challenge lies in discerning the appropriate response when a seemingly minor deviation from standard procedure is proposed, which could inadvertently weaken the overall security framework. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the proposed modification against established security policies and risk management principles. This aligns with the CSO's fundamental responsibility to maintain and enhance the security of the premises. Specifically, it requires consulting the site's security plan, which would detail approved barrier specifications, maintenance procedures, and change management protocols. Any proposed alteration, even if seemingly minor, must be evaluated for its potential impact on the barrier's effectiveness against unauthorized access, its compliance with any relevant building codes or security standards, and its adherence to the organization's risk appetite. The ethical and regulatory imperative for a CSO is to uphold the integrity of the security system, not to compromise it for expediency. An incorrect approach would be to approve the modification without proper due diligence. This fails to uphold the CSO's duty of care and could lead to regulatory violations if the modification compromises compliance with security standards or building codes. It also represents a failure in risk management, as the potential vulnerabilities introduced by an unassessed modification are ignored. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the request outright without understanding the underlying operational need or exploring potential compliance solutions. While maintaining strict adherence to policy is crucial, a rigid refusal without considering alternatives can hinder operational efficiency and may not always be the most effective long-term security strategy if the underlying issue is not addressed. A CSO should be able to identify and propose compliant alternatives. A further incorrect approach would be to delegate the decision to a subordinate without providing clear guidance or oversight. This abdicates the CSO's responsibility and could lead to inconsistent application of security policies and a weakened overall security posture. The CSO is ultimately accountable for the effectiveness of the physical security measures. The professional reasoning framework for a CSO in such situations involves a systematic process. 1. Identify the core issue. What is the proposed change and why is it being requested? 2. Consult relevant documentation. Refer to the site's security plan, operational procedures, and any applicable regulatory guidelines. 3. Assess the impact. Evaluate the potential security implications of the proposed change on the barrier's effectiveness, compliance, and overall risk profile. 4. Explore compliant alternatives. If the proposed change is non-compliant, investigate if there are alternative solutions that meet both operational needs and security requirements. 5. Document the decision. Record the assessment, the decision made, and the rationale behind it. 6. Communicate effectively. Clearly communicate the decision and its justification to all relevant parties. Question 12. Process analysis reveals a certified security officer, CSO, observing a colleague accepting a gift from a vendor that appears to exceed the value of a customary token of appreciation, and the colleague is subsequently seen altering a security log. Which approach best demonstrates ethical conduct, integrity, and professional behavior in this scenario? Option A. Accept a similar gift from another vendor in the future as a way to normalize such exchanges. Option B. Confront the colleague directly to understand their actions and advise them on proper protocol. Option C. Document the observations discreetly and report them immediately to the CSO's direct supervisor or designated ethics officer. Option D. Ignore the situation to avoid interpersonal conflict and maintain team cohesion. Correct answer is C. Document the observations discreetly and report them immediately to the CSO's direct supervisor or designated ethics officer. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a certified security officer, CSO, to balance their duty to protect assets and information with the ethical imperative of maintaining integrity and professional behavior, even when faced with potential personal gain or pressure. The core of the challenge lies in recognizing and acting upon a conflict of interest, a fundamental aspect of ethical conduct. The correct approach involves immediate and transparent reporting of the observed situation to the appropriate authority within the organization. This aligns directly with the core principles of integrity and professional behavior expected of a CSO. Specifically, most codes of ethics for security professionals, including those implicitly or explicitly referenced in CSO certification frameworks, mandate honesty, transparency, and the avoidance of conflicts of interest. Reporting the situation ensures that the organization can address the potential breach of policy or law through established channels, upholding the company's security protocols and ethical standards. This proactive reporting demonstrates a commitment to professional duty above personal considerations or the desire to avoid confrontation. An incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation or to attempt to handle it informally without reporting. Ignoring the situation represents a failure of professional responsibility and a dereliction of duty. It allows a potential security vulnerability or ethical lapse to persist, which could have significant consequences for the organization. This directly violates the principle of acting with diligence and safeguarding organizational interests. Attempting to handle it informally, perhaps by confronting the individual directly without involving management, could lead to a breakdown in professional relationships, potential accusations of overreach, or even compromise the investigation if one is warranted. This approach bypasses established reporting structures, which are designed to ensure fair and effective resolution of such matters, and demonstrates a lack of understanding of organizational hierarchy and proper procedure. Another incorrect approach would be to accept a personal benefit, such as a gratuity or favor, in exchange for overlooking the observed behavior. This is a clear violation of integrity and constitutes a serious ethical breach, potentially leading to bribery or corruption. It directly undermines the CSO's professional standing and the trust placed in them by their employer and the public. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes ethical principles and established procedures. This involves first identifying the ethical dilemma, then consulting relevant codes of conduct and organizational policies. The next step is to consider the potential consequences of each course of action, both for the individual and the organization. Finally, the professional should choose the action that best upholds integrity, professional behavior, and organizational interests, which in this case involves transparent reporting. Question 13. Cost-benefit analysis shows that while apprehending a suspected shoplifter can prevent immediate loss, the legal ramifications of an improper citizen's arrest can far outweigh the immediate financial gain. A security officer observes an individual acting suspiciously in a retail store, looking around furtively and placing an item into their bag. The officer does not see the item being taken from the shelf, nor do they see the individual conceal it. The individual then attempts to walk towards the exit. What is the most legally sound course of action for the security officer? Option A. Follow the individual discreetly, observe for further actions, and if they attempt to leave without paying, then attempt to detain them and call law enforcement. Option B. Immediately apprehend the individual, using reasonable force to prevent them from leaving, and then contact law enforcement. Option C. Detain the individual immediately based on the suspicious behavior and the attempt to leave, and then call law enforcement. Option D. Confront the individual and demand to see the contents of their bag, threatening to detain them if they refuse. The correct answer is C. Detain the individual immediately based on the suspicious behavior and the attempt to leave, and then call law enforcement. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a security officer to balance the immediate perceived need to apprehend a suspect with the significant legal risks and potential for civil liability associated with an unlawful citizen's arrest. The officer must possess a precise understanding of the legal boundaries of citizen's arrest, which are often narrowly defined and vary by jurisdiction. Failure to adhere strictly to these boundaries can result in criminal charges against the officer, civil lawsuits for false imprisonment or assault, and damage to the reputation of the security company and the officer. Careful judgment is required to assess the certainty of the offense, the imminence of escape, and the proportionality of the force used. The correct approach involves a thorough, on-the-spot assessment of whether the legal criteria for a citizen's arrest are met, specifically focusing on whether a criminal offense has been committed in the officer's presence, and if there is an immediate risk of escape. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental legal principle that citizens' arrest powers are a limited exception to the general prohibition against detaining another person. In the context of the Certified Security Officer (CSO) exam, which implicitly refers to a specific, albeit unstated, jurisdiction's laws, assumed here to be a common law jurisdiction like the U.S. for illustrative purposes, as no specific jurisdiction was provided, the officer must act only when a crime is actually committed in their view, not just suspected. This is a strict evidentiary standard. The officer must also consider the proportionality of force and the necessity of the arrest to prevent escape. Acting within these strict parameters minimizes legal exposure and upholds the rule of law. An incorrect approach would be to detain the individual based solely on a strong suspicion or a report from a third party that a crime may have occurred without direct observation. This fails to meet the legal threshold for a citizen's arrest, as it relies on hearsay or inference rather than direct evidence of a crime in progress. This exposes the officer to liability for false imprisonment. Another incorrect approach is to use excessive force during the apprehension, even if the arrest itself is legally justified. The use of force must be reasonable and proportionate to the threat posed by the suspect and the need to effect the arrest. Excessive force can lead to criminal charges and civil lawsuits, regardless of the legality of the initial detention. A third incorrect approach is to delay reporting the incident to law enforcement or to fail to hand over the suspect and any evidence promptly. Citizens' arrest powers are typically intended to be temporary, facilitating the handover to official authorities. Prolonged detention or failure to involve law enforcement undermines the legitimacy of the citizen's arrest and can create further legal complications. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a mental checklist. 1. Did I witness a criminal offense being committed? Direct observation is key. 2. Is there an immediate risk of the offender escaping if not apprehended? 3. Is the force I intend to use reasonable and proportionate to the circumstances? 4. What is the immediate plan for handing over the individual and evidence to law enforcement? If any of these questions cannot be answered affirmatively and with certainty, the prudent course of action is to observe, gather information, and contact the appropriate authorities, rather than attempting a citizen's arrest. Question 14. When evaluating a situation where a senior manager requests immediate access to a restricted server room without proper authorization or escort, citing an urgent operational need, and instructs you, the Certified Security Officer (CSO), to bypass the standard access control procedures, what is the most professionally responsible course of action? Option A. Grant access by bypassing the controls but make a mental note of the incident to mention it later if any issues arise, without formal documentation or escalation. Option B. Comply with the senior manager's direct order to bypass the access control system to grant immediate access, prioritizing the perceived urgent operational need and managerial authority. Option C. Refuse the direct order to bypass access controls. Explain that established protocols must be followed for security integrity, and offer to escort the manager to the server room after completing the necessary authorization process, or to escalate the request through the proper security channels for a documented exception. Option D. Refuse the order and inform the manager that they are not authorized, but take no further action to escalate the issue or offer alternative secure solutions. Correct answer is C. Refuse the direct order to bypass access controls. Explain that established protocols must be followed for security integrity, and offer to escort the manager to the server room after completing the necessary authorization process, or to escalate the request through the proper security channels for a documented exception. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Certified Security Officer (CSO) by placing them in a position where a direct order conflicts with established security protocols and potentially legal requirements regarding data privacy and access control. The CSO must balance the need for operational efficiency and compliance with management directives against their responsibility to uphold security integrity and adhere to regulatory frameworks. The core of the challenge lies in the potential for unauthorized access and the subsequent breach of sensitive information, which could have significant legal and reputational consequences. The correct approach involves refusing the direct order to bypass established access control systems for a non-authorized individual, even if that individual is a senior manager. This is because the CSO's primary duty is to maintain the security of the premises and the data within, as mandated by the relevant regulatory framework governing CSO responsibilities. Bypassing access controls, even for a seemingly minor reason, creates a security vulnerability and violates the principle of least privilege, which is a cornerstone of effective access control. The CSO should then escalate the issue through appropriate channels, such as informing their direct supervisor or the security manager, and documenting the request and their refusal. This upholds the integrity of the security system, adheres to the principle of accountability, and ensures that any exceptions are handled through a formal, documented process that assesses risk and obtains proper authorization, thereby complying with the spirit and letter of security regulations. An incorrect approach would be to comply with the direct order without question. This failure stems from a lack of understanding or disregard for the established security protocols and the potential ramifications of unauthorized access. It demonstrates a prioritization of immediate managerial convenience over long-term security and compliance, which is a direct violation of the CSO's professional obligations and could lead to a data breach, unauthorized access to sensitive areas, and subsequent legal penalties. Another incorrect approach would be to grant access but fail to document the deviation from protocol. While seemingly less severe than outright bypassing, this still undermines the security system's audit trail and accountability mechanisms. Without proper documentation, it becomes impossible to track who accessed what, when, and why, hindering investigations in case of an incident and making it difficult to enforce security policies consistently. This lack of transparency and accountability is a significant ethical and regulatory failing. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to refuse the order and then take no further action or attempt to resolve the situation through informal means. This demonstrates a lack of initiative and a failure to properly manage the security risk. The CSO has a responsibility not only to refuse an improper request, but also to ensure that the underlying issue is addressed through the proper channels to prevent recurrence or to find a secure, authorized solution. The professional decision-making process in such situations should involve a clear understanding of the established security policies and procedures, a thorough assessment of the risks associated with any proposed deviation, and a commitment to escalating issues through appropriate reporting lines when faced with conflicting directives or potential security compromises. The CSO must act as a guardian of security, prioritizing compliance and integrity over expediency or direct pressure from management when those pressures conflict with their professional duties. Question 15. The control framework reveals that during a routine patrol, a certified security officer, CSO, observes an unauthorized individual attempting to access a restricted area. The CSO needs to report this incident via radio. Which of the following actions best demonstrates adherence to proper radio communication protocols, codes, and usage as mandated by the Certified Security Officer, CSO, regulatory framework? Option A. The CSO transmits a lengthy, descriptive report of the individual's appearance and behavior, interspersed with personal observations about the weather, to provide a comprehensive picture. Option B. The CSO uses a personal nickname for the individual and describes the situation using informal language, assuming other officers will understand the context. Option C. The CSO immediately transmits a detailed description of the individual and their actions, including their perceived intent, using clear, unencoded language to ensure maximum understanding. Option D. The CSO uses a pre-approved brevity code to report an unauthorized access attempt and requests immediate backup to their location, providing only essential details. The correct answer is C. The CSO immediately transmits a detailed description of the individual and their actions, including their perceived intent, using clear, unencoded language to ensure maximum understanding. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the critical nature of radio communication in security operations. Misuse or misunderstanding of protocols can lead to delayed responses, misallocated resources, compromised operational security, and potentially endanger personnel or the public. The certified security officer, CSO, must demonstrate a thorough understanding of established radio communication procedures, including the correct use of codes and the importance of clear, concise messaging, all within the specific regulatory framework governing their operations. The correct approach involves adhering strictly to the established radio communication protocols, utilizing approved brevity codes, and ensuring all transmissions are clear, concise, and relevant to the operational situation. This aligns with the fundamental principles of effective and secure communication mandated by security regulations, which prioritize operational efficiency, accountability, and the prevention of unauthorized information dissemination. Proper use of codes ensures that information is conveyed quickly and accurately to authorized personnel, minimizing ambiguity and the risk of misinterpretation. An incorrect approach that involves using personal slang or jargon during transmissions is professionally unacceptable because it violates established brevity codes and can lead to confusion among other officers who may not understand the slang. This directly contravenes the regulatory requirement for clear and standardized communication, potentially delaying critical responses. Another incorrect approach, transmitting sensitive operational details over an unsecured channel without proper encryption or authorization, poses a significant security risk. This breaches confidentiality protocols and could compromise ongoing operations or reveal vulnerabilities to unauthorized parties, a direct violation of security directives. Finally, an approach that involves prolonged, unnecessary chatter or personal conversations over the operational radio frequency is unacceptable. This clutters the airwaves, hinders legitimate operational traffic, and demonstrates a lack of professionalism and disregard for the primary purpose of the radio system, which is for essential security communications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols, assesses the criticality of the information being transmitted, and considers the potential impact of their communication on operational effectiveness and security. This involves a constant self-assessment of whether the transmission is necessary, clear, concise, and compliant with all relevant regulations and internal policies. Question 16. Analysis of a situation where a security officer receives an anonymous report of a potential active threat within a public venue, with no immediate visual confirmation of the threat. What is the most appropriate initial emergency response procedure for a certified security officer, CSO, to adopt? Option A. Attempt to locate and visually confirm the threat before taking any action. Option B. Focus on securing valuable assets and exits while observing for the threat. Option C. Immediately initiate a full building evacuation and alert emergency services. Option D. Contact internal management for guidance before initiating any external communication. The correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a full building evacuation and alert emergency services. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate decisive action under pressure, where the consequences of error can be severe, impacting life safety and organizational reputation. The certified security officer, CSO, must balance rapid response with adherence to established protocols and legal obligations. Careful judgment is required to assess the evolving situation and select the most appropriate course of action that aligns with best practices and regulatory requirements. The correct approach involves prioritizing immediate life safety by initiating evacuation procedures for the affected area, while simultaneously alerting emergency services and internal command. This aligns with fundamental security principles and regulatory frameworks that mandate prompt action to mitigate harm during emergencies, specifically under typical CSO regulatory frameworks, assuming a U.S.-based context for this exam, as no specific jurisdiction was provided beyond Certified Security Officer, CSO. This approach is justified by regulations such as OSHA General Duty Clause, which requires employers to provide a workplace free from recognized hazards likely to cause death or serious physical harm, and Emergency Action Plans, EAP, mandated by OSHA 29 CFR 1910. 38. These regulations emphasize clear communication, evacuation, and notification of authorities as critical components of emergency preparedness. An incorrect approach that involves waiting for definitive confirmation of the threat before initiating any action is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This delay directly contravenes the principle of prioritizing life safety and the requirement for prompt action in emergency situations. It could lead to preventable injuries or fatalities, violating the CSO's duty of care and potentially exposing the organization to legal liability under negligence principles and specific emergency preparedness standards. Another incorrect approach, such as attempting to personally neutralize the threat without proper training, equipment, or authorization, is also a critical failure. This action bypasses established protocols for emergency response, which typically involve trained first responders and law enforcement. It places the CSO and others at undue risk, potentially escalating the situation and hindering the efforts of professional emergency personnel. This violates the principle of acting within one's scope of authority and competence, and it disregards the established chain of command and communication protocols essential for effective emergency management. A further incorrect approach, focusing solely on securing assets or property before addressing the immediate safety of individuals, represents a severe ethical and regulatory lapse. Security protocols universally prioritize human life over property. This approach demonstrates a misunderstanding of the CSO's primary responsibility and could result in severe harm to individuals, leading to significant legal and ethical repercussions. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a rapid threat assessment, followed by immediate implementation of the most critical life-saving measures as outlined in the organization's emergency response plan. This includes clear communication, activation of alarm systems, evacuation of affected areas, and timely notification of appropriate emergency services and internal stakeholders. The CSO must remain calm, follow established protocols, and adapt their response based on evolving information, while always prioritizing the safety and well-being of all individuals present. Question 17. The performance metrics show a consistent pattern of bomb threats received by the facility over the past quarter. During a recent incident, a security officer received a call reporting a device in the main lobby. The officer immediately initiated a full building evacuation, considering the need for efficient and effective response to such threats. Which of the following actions best reflects the mandated procedures for a certified security officer, CSO, in this jurisdiction? Option A. Disregard the threat as likely a hoax, given the frequency of such calls, and continue with normal security patrols to avoid unnecessary disruption. Option B. Initiate a systematic threat assessment to determine the credibility and potential severity of the threat before deciding on the appropriate response, which may include a phased evacuation if deemed necessary. Option C. Contact the local police department and await their instructions before taking any action, as they are solely responsible for bomb threat response. Option D. Immediately initiate a full building evacuation to ensure the safety of all personnel and visitors, as any bomb threat must be treated with the utmost seriousness. Correct answer is B. Initiate a systematic threat assessment to determine the credibility and potential severity of the threat before deciding on the appropriate response, which may include a phased evacuation if deemed necessary. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate critical decision-making under pressure with potentially life-threatening consequences. A certified security officer, CSO, must balance the need for swift action to protect life with the risk of causing undue panic or disruption. The effectiveness of the response hinges on accurate threat assessment and adherence to established protocols. The correct approach involves a systematic threat assessment followed by a measured evacuation based on the assessed risk level. This aligns with the core principles of security management, emphasizing proportional response and the preservation of life. Specifically, regulatory frameworks for security personnel, such as those governing CSO responsibilities, mandate a structured approach to emergency incidents. This includes the requirement to gather information, assess credibility, and implement appropriate safety measures, which in this context means initiating an evacuation only when the threat is deemed credible and imminent, or when specific evacuation triggers outlined in the site's emergency plan are met. This ensures that resources are not unnecessarily deployed and that the public is not exposed to the risks associated with a premature or unnecessary evacuation. An incorrect approach that involves immediate, full-scale evacuation upon receiving any bomb threat, regardless of its perceived credibility or specific details, fails to meet the professional standard. This approach disregards the critical step of threat assessment, which is a fundamental requirement for responsible security operations. Such an action could lead to significant disruption, economic loss, and potentially create a more dangerous situation by causing panic and overcrowding. Ethically, it represents an overreaction that could undermine public trust in security procedures. Another incorrect approach, which is to dismiss the threat entirely without any form of assessment or verification, is equally unacceptable. This demonstrates a failure to uphold the duty of care expected of a CSO. Regulatory guidelines universally require security personnel to take all credible threats seriously and to follow established procedures for their evaluation. Ignoring a potential threat, even if it later proves to be a hoax, carries severe ethical and legal ramifications, as it prioritizes convenience over the safety of individuals. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear step-by-step protocol. First, acknowledge and record the threat details. Second, initiate a preliminary assessment of the threat's credibility based on available information e.g., source, specificity, tone. Third, consult the site's emergency response plan for specific bomb threat procedures. Fourth, based on the assessment and plan, decide on the appropriate course of action, which may range from increased vigilance and search to partial or full evacuation. Throughout this process, clear communication with relevant authorities and internal stakeholders is paramount. Question 18. Compliance review shows that during a recent simulated active shooter drill, a certified security officer, CSO, was faced with a scenario where the shooter's location was initially unknown, but believed to be within the facility. The CSO's immediate actions were critical in determining the effectiveness of the response. Considering the regulatory framework for certified security officers, which of the following approaches best reflects the required protocol for initial response and coordination with law enforcement? Option A. Attempt to locate and apprehend the shooter independently using available security personnel and equipment before notifying law enforcement. Option B. Secure the CSO's immediate work area and await the arrival of law enforcement without taking any proactive measures to alert others or initiate protective protocols. Option C. Immediately initiate a building-wide lockdown and establish communication with local law enforcement to provide an initial report and request their immediate response, while preparing for potential shelter-in-place or evacuation based on evolving information and law enforcement guidance. Option D. Direct all occupants to immediately evacuate the building to a designated safe zone outside the facility, without first confirming the shooter's location or coordinating with responding law enforcement. Correct answer is C. Immediately initiate a building-wide lockdown and establish communication with local law enforcement to provide an initial report and request their immediate response, while preparing for potential shelter-in-place or evacuation based on evolving information and law enforcement guidance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires immediate, high-stakes decision-making under extreme duress, where the consequences of error can be catastrophic. The CSO must balance the immediate need for decisive action to protect life with the critical requirement for coordinated, lawful response. The inherent chaos of an active shooter event, coupled with the potential for misidentification and escalating violence, demands a protocol-driven yet adaptable approach. The professional challenge lies in maintaining situational awareness, adhering to established protocols, and effectively communicating with responding law enforcement while ensuring the safety of those under the CSO's protection. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves immediate lockdown and communication with law enforcement, followed by a coordinated evacuation or shelter-in-place strategy based on real-time intelligence and law enforcement guidance. This aligns with the core principles of active shooter response protocols, which prioritize immediate life preservation through containment and the establishment of a secure perimeter. The emphasis on communication with law enforcement is paramount, as it ensures that the CSO's actions are integrated into the broader law enforcement response, preventing friendly fire incidents and facilitating the neutralization of the threat. This approach is ethically sound, as it places the highest value on human life, and legally defensible, as it adheres to established security protocols and the lawful authority of responding officers. Incorrect approaches analysis. Initiating an immediate, uncoordinated counterassault without confirmed law enforcement presence or clear tactical advantage is a critical failure. This approach bypasses established protocols that emphasize the primary role of law enforcement in neutralizing active threats. Such an action could lead to increased casualties, friendly fire incidents, and legal repercussions for the CSO and their organization. It demonstrates a lack of understanding of the jurisdictional authority and the specialized training of law enforcement in active shooter situations. Attempting to evacuate all personnel from the building immediately, without first securing the area or coordinating with law enforcement, is also a flawed strategy. This could create panic, lead to individuals moving into the path of the shooter, and overwhelm responding officers. It fails to account for the dynamic nature of the threat and the need for a controlled, phased response guided by law enforcement. Ignoring the incident and waiting for law enforcement to arrive without implementing any protective measures is a dereliction of duty. While law enforcement has primary responsibility for threat neutralization, security personnel have a duty to implement immediate protective actions within their purview, such as initiating lockdowns or alerting authorities. This passive approach fails to uphold the CSO's responsibility to protect life and property to the best of their ability within established protocols. Professional reasoning. In active shooter situations, a CSO must employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes life safety, adheres to established protocols, and facilitates seamless integration with law enforcement. This involves 1. Immediate threat assessment and activation of emergency protocols. 2. Prioritizing lockdown and communication with 911 and responding agencies. 3. Following law enforcement guidance for evacuation or shelter in place. 4. Maintaining situational awareness and reporting critical information. This structured approach ensures that actions are lawful, ethical, and contribute effectively to the overall resolution of the incident. Question 19. Research into the operational procedures for a certified security officer, CSO, managing CCTV systems reveals a situation where footage is required for an internal disciplinary review. The CSO is aware that this footage may also be relevant to a potential external investigation. What is the most appropriate course of action for the CSO to ensure regulatory compliance and evidence integrity? Option A. Provide the raw, unedited footage directly from the live system to the internal investigator immediately to expedite the disciplinary process. Option B. Delete footage that appears irrelevant to the immediate internal disciplinary review to save storage space and streamline the process. Option C. Allow an untrained colleague to access and review the footage on the operational system to identify relevant segments for the internal review. Option D. Secure the original CCTV footage. Create a forensic copy for analysis and meticulously document the chain of custody for both the original and the copy, restricting access to authorized personnel only. Correct answer is D. Secure the original CCTV footage, create a forensic copy for analysis, and meticulously document the chain of custody for both the original and the copy, restricting access to authorized personnel only. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a certified security officer, CSO, to balance the operational needs of a CCTV system with strict legal and ethical obligations regarding evidence preservation. The CSO must understand that improperly handled CCTV footage can render it inadmissible in legal proceedings, undermining investigations and potentially leading to miscarriages of justice. The pressure to quickly provide footage for an internal investigation, while simultaneously ensuring its integrity for potential external use, demands a nuanced and compliant approach. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves meticulously documenting the chain of custody for the CCTV footage. This means that from the moment the footage is identified as potential evidence, its retrieval, storage, and transfer must be recorded. This documentation should include who accessed the footage, when, why, and what actions were taken. The original footage should be secured and a forensic copy made for analysis. This rigorous process ensures the integrity and authenticity of the evidence, making it admissible in court and compliant with the principles of evidence preservation mandated by relevant legal frameworks governing security operations. Incorrect approach is analysis. Providing the raw, unedited footage directly from the live system without any documentation or forensic copying is an incorrect approach. This bypasses essential evidence preservation protocols, creating a high risk of the footage being altered, accidentally deleted, or its integrity compromised. This failure to maintain a chain of custody directly violates regulatory requirements for evidence handling and ethical obligations to ensure the reliability of information used in investigations. Allowing an untrained colleague to access and review the footage on the operational system without supervision or proper logging is also incorrect. This introduces the possibility of accidental modification or deletion of critical evidence. Furthermore, it breaches the principle of controlled access to sensitive information and evidence, potentially leading to unauthorized disclosure or manipulation, which is a serious regulatory and ethical lapse. Deleting footage that is deemed irrelevant to the immediate internal investigation before its potential evidentiary value is fully assessed is a critical error. Even if seemingly unimportant at first glance, footage may later become crucial for an external investigation or legal proceeding. Premature deletion constitutes spoliation of evidence, a severe legal offense with significant consequences, and a direct violation of evidence preservation duties. Professional reasoning. Certified security officers must adopt a proactive and compliant mindset when dealing with potential evidence. The decision-making process should always prioritize adherence to established legal frameworks and ethical guidelines for evidence handling. This involves 1. Identification, recognizing footage as potential evidence. 2. Preservation, immediately securing the original footage and initiating forensic copying. 3. Documentation, meticulously recording every step of the chain of custody. 4. Controlled access, ensuring only authorized personnel handle the evidence under strict protocols. 5. Legal consultation, if in doubt about evidentiary value or handling procedures, consulting with legal counsel or designated authorities. This systematic approach ensures that evidence remains admissible and that the CSO fulfills their professional and legal responsibilities. Question 20. The performance metrics show a recurring pattern of increased customer complaints related to perceived unprofessional conduct by security officers during interactions with distressed individuals. Specifically, a recent incident involved a patron exhibiting agitated behavior in a public area, leading to a verbal altercation. The CSO on duty responded by immediately issuing stern warnings and attempting to physically escort the individual away, which exacerbated the situation, resulting in the patron becoming more aggressive and requiring further intervention. Which of the following communication strategies would best align with the Certified Security Officer (CSO) regulatory framework and best practices for de-escalation in this scenario? Option A. Ignore the individual's agitated state and proceed with a pre-planned security protocol without attempting any verbal engagement or de-escalation. Option B. Engage the individual in a debate about the validity of their complaints or behavior to prove them wrong and establish dominance. Option C. Approach the individual calmly, make eye contact, and use a soft, reassuring tone of voice. Actively listen to their concerns without interruption, acknowledge their feelings, and then clearly and concisely explain the expected behavior and the reasons for it, offering a path towards resolution. Option D. Immediately issue loud, authoritative commands to cease the disruptive behavior and prepare for removal from the premises, regardless of the individual's verbal responses. The correct answer is C. Approach the individual calmly, make eye contact, and use a soft, reassuring tone of voice. Actively listen to their concerns without interruption, acknowledge their feelings, and then clearly and concisely explain the expected behavior and the reasons for it, offering a path towards resolution. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the Certified Security Officer, CSO, to balance immediate operational needs with the long-term implications of their communication. The CSO must de-escalate a tense situation while ensuring all actions align with the established regulatory framework for security personnel in the specified jurisdiction. Failure to communicate effectively or to de-escalate appropriately can lead to increased conflict, potential harm to individuals, damage to property, and regulatory sanctions against the CSO and their employer. The pressure to resolve the situation quickly must not override the adherence to professional standards and legal requirements. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a calm, empathetic, and clear verbal communication strategy aimed at de-escalating the situation. This includes active listening to understand the individual's concerns, acknowledging their feelings without necessarily agreeing with their actions, and then clearly stating the boundaries and expectations in a non-confrontational manner. This aligns with the core principles of effective communication and de-escalation expected of CSOs, which are often implicitly or explicitly covered in training mandated by regulatory bodies governing security professionals. The focus is on reducing tension and finding a resolution that respects the rights and safety of all parties involved, consistent with the duty of care expected of a CSO. Incorrect approach is analysis, an approach that involves immediate, forceful verbal commands without attempting to understand the individual's perspective is incorrect. This can escalate the situation, making de-escalation impossible and potentially leading to a physical confrontation. It fails to demonstrate active listening and empathy, which are crucial for de-escalation and are often emphasized in CSO training protocols. An approach that involves ignoring the individual's concerns and proceeding with a predetermined course of action, such as immediate removal, is also incorrect. This demonstrates a lack of active listening and can be perceived as dismissive and disrespectful, further antagonizing the individual. It bypasses the opportunity to de-escalate through dialogue and could lead to unnecessary force or legal challenges. An approach that involves engaging in a debate or argument with the individual, attempting to prove them wrong, is incorrect. This shifts the focus from de-escalation to confrontation and is unlikely to resolve the underlying issue. It demonstrates poor judgment in managing a tense situation and can escalate emotions, making a peaceful resolution more difficult. Professional reasoning. When faced with a situation requiring de-escalation, a CSO should first assess the immediate threat level. If there is no imminent danger, the priority is to establish a calm and respectful dialogue. This involves active listening, using open-ended questions to understand the individual's perspective, and acknowledging their emotions. The CSO should then clearly and calmly communicate the necessary actions or boundaries, explaining the reasons behind them in a concise and understandable manner. The goal is to guide the individual towards compliance through reasoned communication, rather than coercion, thereby upholding professional standards and ensuring safety.